two animals, both cold, both soft, both, to most English-speaking people, somewhere between a joke and a dare. One of them was declared edible by a committee of monks looking for a loophole. The other is currently being declared inedible by a committee of scientists. While it's still on the menu in half the world, frogs and octopus. And between them, they explain almost everything about how the line around your plate actually gets drawn. Start with the frog because the standard story is wrong in a way that's genuinely funny. The British have mocked the French over frog legs for centuries. It's the oldest insult in the pile. But archaeologists excavating a site in Wiltshire, a few miles from Stonehenge, found charred frog and toad bones dating back around 10,000 years. Evidence that people in Britain were roasting and eating frogs roughly 8 millennia before anyone in France thought to write it down. The British didn't reject frog because it was foreign. They ate it first, forgot, and then built an identity out of finding it disgusting. What actually made the frog French was paperwork. The first European written record of frog legs as a dish comes from 12th century Catholic Church material in France. The Church imposed meat-free days, fast days, Lent, roughly a third of the calendar in some periods, and meat meant warm-blooded animals. Fish was permitted, and the frog, being cold-blooded and semi-aquatic, was argued into the fish column. The popular version says monks pushed for the classification because they'd grown too comfortable and wanted the loophole. Whether that's history or a good story attached afterwards, the classification itself is real, and the consequence is what matters. A doctrinal decision about which column an animal belonged in determined what an entire nation would be eating 800 years later. Nothing about the frog changed. A category changed. And once the category existed, everything followed. Peasants copied the monks. By the 1600s, frog legs were fashionable in Paris. Today, France gets through roughly 4,000 tons a year, somewhere near 80 million animals. In China, the word for them is tianzhi, field chicken. Nutritionally, they're unremarkable in the best way. Around 70 calories and 16 grams of protein per 100 grams, low fat, mild. People consistently describe them as tasting like slightly fishy chicken. That's the entire mystery. Chicken-flavored protein that most of the English-speaking world treats as a bad dream because of a religious filing decision made in the 12th century that they weren't party to. But here's where the frog story stops being charming. France banned commercial frog farming of its native species in the 1980s because it had eaten through its own supply. So Europe imports. The EU is now the largest frog leg importer on Earth, averaging in the region of 4,000 to 5,000 tons a year, which conservation groups estimate at somewhere between 1 and 2 billion individual frogs per decade. The overwhelming majority are not farmed. They're caught wild. And this has already gone badly once, in a way almost nobody in Europe noticed. Through the 1970s and 80s, India and Bangladesh were the world's main suppliers. Wild frogs were harvested at industrial scale for export. Then the Ecological bill arrived. Frogs are among the most effective insect predators in a rice paddy, pests and crucially mosquitoes. With the frogs gone, insect populations surged and both countries had to import pesticides to do the job the frogs had been doing free. In Bangladesh's case, the pesticide import cost is reported to have exceeded the entire foreign exchange earned from frog leg exports. They had, in effect, sold their pest control and then bought it back at a loss. India banned export in 1987. Bangladesh followed in 1989. Populations recovered, and the trade simply moved to Indonesia, which now supplies the large majority of Europe's frogs, mostly wild-caught, with the same species-by-species decline showing up in the data. So the frog is an animal that a clerical decision moved into the food column, and that's where it stayed, right up to the point of eating whole ecosystems out from under itself. Now the octopus, where the same machinery is running in reverse. Octopus has been ordinary food around the Mediterranean for thousands of years. Greece, Spain, Italy, Portugal, and across Japan, Korea, and Southeast Asia. Global landings run somewhere in the range of 350,000 to 400,000 tins a year. In Galicia, pulpo a feira is festival food. Nothing about it is exotic where it's eaten. The English-speaking world got a different introduction. In 1866, Victor Hugo published a novel containing an extended, lurid description of a man being attacked by one, and it landed on the Anglophone imagination with enormous force. Then, in 1871, the Crystal Palace Aquarium in London put a live one on display and advertised it as the wonderful octopus, or devilfish. Crowds queued. The papers covered the animal the way they covered prize livestock. The craze got its own name at the time, cephalomania. The animal arrived in British culture not as seafood, but as a monster with a marketing campaign. And that's the version that got exported to America, where devilfish stuck as a common name for decades, which is why the parallel case is so instructive. The octopus's close relative, the squid, was considered bait in the United States for most of the 20th century, thrown back or used to catch fish people actually wanted. Then, in the 1970s, cod and other traditional stocks crashed, and there was a deliberate, organized push to get Americans eating the abundant thing instead. It required one change. The name. Squid became calamari, from the Italian, and by the 1980s it was on appetizer menus nationwide, sitting beside the wings. Same animal, same body, new noun, total reversal, so the octopus should have been next. Except something happened first. We found out what's inside it. An octopus has roughly 500 million neurons, comparable in raw count to a dog. But only about a third are in the central brain. The other 2/3 are distributed through the arms, which taste and touch and make decisions semi-independently while the brain sets a general goal. It's a genuinely different architecture for a mind. Our last common ancestor with them lived something like 500 to 600 million years ago, before anything resembling a brain existed, meaning whatever intelligence they have, they evolved it separately from us, from scratch. And it's not subtle. They open jars, they solve mazes and remember the solution. Veined octopuses carry coconut shell halves across open seabed and reassemble them into shelters later, which is planning for a future situation using a tool you brought with you. They barricade dens with rocks. They escape tanks, unscrew fittings, and can distinguish between individual human keepers. In 2021, a team at the London School of Economics, led by Jonathan Birch, reviewed over 300 studies for the UK government and concluded that cephalopods and decapods should be regarded as sentient. The following year, octopus, squid, cuttlefish, crabs, and lobsters were written into the Animal Welfare Sentience Act. The first time any of them had legal protection in the UK outside a laboratory. Then, a Spanish company announced plans for the world's first commercial octopus farm in the Canary Islands, and the reaction was immediate. In 2024, Washington state banned octopus farming outright, the first such law anywhere. California followed the same year. Bans are pending in several more states and under discussion in other countries, and the Canary Islands government rejected the farm's environmental assessment. Notice what that is. It's an animal being moved out of the food category preemptively by legislation before the industry that would farm it even exists, which is the whole thing in one sentence. The frog was moved into food by a religious classification and stayed there for 9 centuries. The octopus is being moved out of food by a scientific one, in real time, in front of us. Neither animal changed. In both cases, what changed was the paperwork, and the paperwork changed because the story did. And there's an uncomfortable edge on that, which is the part worth sitting with. The argument now being made against eating octopus is that it's intelligent, solves problems, remembers, and can suffer. Every one of those things is also true of a pig. Nobody is drafting that bill